In an era where almost every moment is lived with the screen within reach, the heart is no longer hidden. It is bombarded, exposed, stretched, and shaped, sometimes subtly, sometimes violently, by images, sounds, words, and symbols we barely even notice anymore. The feed refreshes, the music plays, the ads roll by, and somewhere in the midst of it, the soul is quietly absorbing more than the mind can track. Proverbs 4 verse 23 says it with piercing clarity. Above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. These are not soft words, they are a command. They are a call to action, and they are desperately needed in a time when guarding the heart has become less instinctive and more countercultural. The modern world teaches us to guard many things. We guard our privacy with passwords, our homes with security systems, our identities with encryption. We even guard our images, curating how we appear to others through filters and edits. But in the middle of all this guarding, the heart often remains unprotected. Not because it is forgotten, but because it is misunderstood. The heart is not just the seat of emotion, it is the center of being. It is the place where thoughts become decisions, where values become actions, where belief becomes behavior. When Proverbs tells us to guard the heart, it is not speaking about managing feelings. It is speaking about preserving the very source of life itself. This becomes even more urgent when we realize that the heart is under constant assault. Not from obvious enemies, but from the subtle, everyday noise of the world. Every notification has potential to shape a mood. Every song carries a message. Every image speaks a language. And the danger is not just in what is offensive or extreme, it is in what is casual, normalized, constant. The slow drip of compromise is harder to notice than a sudden collapse. And that is exactly why wisdom says, above all else, pay attention to what reaches your heart. People spend hours curating what enters their digital space, blocking accounts, muting conversations, adjusting privacy settings. But the same level of discernment is rarely applied to the spiritual space. It is easy to forget that while a phone can filter content, it cannot filter impact. Technology can manage exposure, but only wisdom can protect the soul. Proverbs reminds us that the issue is not just external, it is internal. What flows into the heart eventually flows out into life. If bitterness takes root, it will appear in speech. If envy is nurtured, it will distort perception. If lust is entertained, it will compromise integrity. The heart does not stay silent. It overflows. And yet, many try to live disconnected from their hearts. They assume that what they watch does not affect them, that what they listen to is just entertainment, that what they scroll past is harmless. But wisdom sees through that illusion. It knows that repetition forms identity. It knows that attention is worship. What you give your focus to eventually gains influence over you. And the feed, though it seems passive, has power. It shapes how people think about success, beauty, love, morality, identity. It creates hunger, it stirs comparison, it awakens fear. That is why Proverbs speak so urgently, because the heart is not a container. It is a conduit, and what flows through it touches everything. The command to guard the heart also implies responsibility. No one else can do this for you. Not a platform, not a policy, not a program. It is not the job of the algorithm to protect your soul. It is not the role of influencers to uphold your purity. It is not even the task of friends to monitor your internal world. Guarding the heart is sacred work, and it is personal. It requires awareness, intention, humility, and discipline. It asks questions that are often uncomfortable. Why does this make me feel anxious? What am I feeding myself emotionally? Who am I becoming as a result of this daily intake? These questions are not always easy to answer, but they are essential. Because without them, the heart drifts. And when the heart drifts, the life drifts. You begin to respond to the world not from a place of strength, but from a place of erosion. Your decisions become reactive, your peace becomes fragile, your convictions become negotiable. But when the heart is guarded, not by walls of fear, but by filters of wisdom, everything changes. You begin to recognize danger sooner. You begin to resist temptation faster. You begin to live from a center that is not easily shaken. The language of Proverbs does not suggest paranoia. It suggests priority. Guarding the heart is not about isolation, but about discernment. It does not mean rejecting the world, but navigating it with eyes open and spirit grounded. It means understanding that every input has an outcome, that what seems small can grow large, that what seems harmless can become harmful if it gains access to the inner places of the soul. And perhaps most importantly, guarding the heart is not about closing off love, but about protecting love from being distorted. In a world where love is marketed, sold, trivialized, and twisted, the heart needs constant anchoring. Because true love, pure love, sacrificial love, it does not grow by accident. It grows when the heart is not overrun by counterfeit desires. It grows when space is made for God to shape affections, reorder priorities, and heal wounds. And all of that begins with this divine instruction. Above all else, guard your heart. Long before words became hashtags, slogans, and viral soundbites, they were known for what they truly are: creative forces with real consequence. Proverbs does not treat speech lightly. It does not reduce language to expression or conversation. It presents words as instruments that shape destinies, pierce hearts, build faith, and fracture souls. When Proverbs 18 verse 21 declares that death and life are in the power of the tongue, it is not offering poetic exaggeration. It is unveiling a truth that modern culture often forgets in its rush to be clever, loud, or simply heard. Speech is sacred. It can breathe life into a weary soul, and it can unravel someone's identity in a single sentence. The tongue, small though it is, holds the weight of eternity in its movements. We live in a world where words are cheapened by repetition and polluted by carelessness. Sarcasm has become a social norm. Gossip is often disguised as concern, and digital conversations blur the line between honesty and cruelty. Comment sections serve as battlegrounds. Subtweets carry undertones that wound. Public rants replace private resolution. All the while, language that was designed to bless has become a weapon of war. Proverbs speaks directly into this environment, not just to correct behavior, but to awaken the soul to the power it carries. Words are not neutral. They build or they break. They carry the fingerprints of the speaker's heart and the potential to transform someone else's. What makes this so urgent is the ease with which language is now shared. In ancient times, words were spoken face to face, and their weight was felt in the presence of another person. Now distance dulls accountability. Screens provide anonymity, and speed makes thoughtfulness feel like a luxury. But wisdom does not change with the medium. Whether written in ink, typed in a caption, or spoken into a mic, words still matter. They still shape identity. They still echo into the spirit. Proverbs reminds us that what is said cannot be unsaid. It plants seeds, good or bad, and every seed grows something. Gossip, for instance, is not a small sin. Proverbs confronts it repeatedly, not because it is dramatic, but because it is deceptive. It masquerades as conversation while functioning as corrosion. It slowly eats away at trust, integrity, and unity. Proverbs 16 verse 28 warns that a perverse person stirs conflict, and a gossip separates close friends. This is not about rumor alone. It is about the slow poisoning of community, the quiet destruction of reputation, the theft of dignity that happens when words are used carelessly. In a culture obsessed with knowing everyone's business, Proverbs draws a line and says, "This is not wisdom." Equally destructive is slander, the deliberate attempt to harm through falsehood. Proverbs 10 verse 18 states that whoever spreads slander is a fool. It is not merely offensive, it is foolish, because it not only harms the target, it corrupts the speaker. Every time speech is used to tear someone down unjustly, the speaker loses part of their own moral clarity. The heart becomes hardened, the conscience dulled. The person who uses words as weapons may feel powerful in the moment, but the damage is not one-directional, it always returns. Yet the problem does not end with what is overtly harmful. Careless talk is just as dangerous. Proverbs 12 verse 18 says the words of the reckless pierce like swords. That verse is haunting in its imagery. It does not say hateful words, it says reckless ones. Words spoken without thought, without care, without discernment. Jokes that degrade, comments that dismiss, replies that mock. Words used as entertainment can still leave scars. And the wounds they create often run deeper than anyone realizes, because people may laugh outwardly while bleeding inwardly. Wisdom calls us to speak not only with truth, but with intention. Digital bullying is a modern term, but the principle is ancient. Proverbs speaks of those who lay traps with their mouths, who ambush the innocent with their speech. The method may change. Today it's through screens, usernames, messages, but the damage is the same. Proverbs does not excuse this kind of behavior as a product of immaturity or impulsiveness. It names it, it condemns it, and it calls for something radically different. Not just silence, but sanctified speech. Words that heal, words that carry the fragrance of heaven, words that restore. This is where the chapter turns, because Proverbs does not only warn, it also invites. It calls us to recognize not just the danger of our words, but the divine opportunity they carry. If death is in the tongue, then so is life. And life, when spoken, has the power to change everything. Proverbs 15 verse 23 says a person finds joy in giving an apt reply, and how good is a timely word. It speaks to the soul's ability to lift another simply by being present, thoughtful, and kind. A timely word does not have to be long. It has to be sincere. It has to be true. And it has to be anchored in love. Encouragement, in the language of Proverbs, is not shallow praise. It is a weapon of light in a dark world. It breaks fear. It strengthens resolve. It restores dignity. Words that bless do not flatter. They remind people of who they are in the eyes of God. When spoken with sincerity, they carry healing that no therapy session or applause can match. Proverbs 16 verse 24 says gracious words are a honeycomb, sweet to the soul and healing to the bones. Imagine what could change in the world if people returned to speech like that, not because it's polite, but because it's powerful. Truth, too, must be spoken, not as a weapon, but as a gift. Proverbs never calls for flattery, for empty affirmation, or for soft lies that avoid confrontation. It calls for speech that is honest, but also loving. Proverbs 27 verse 6 says wounds from a friend can be trusted, but an enemy multiplies kisses. That kind of wisdom flips the modern mindset. It shows that truth, when offered from love, even when it hurts, brings more healing than dishonest affirmation ever could. Words spoken in truth pierce in a way that does not destroy, they break chains. Prayer is perhaps the highest use of speech, and while Proverbs does not speak of it as directly as the Psalms, its foundation supports it deeply. If the mouth holds the power of life, then what greater use of that power than to speak with the one who gives life? Prayer is not just expression, it is transformation. When the tongue is trained in prayer, it learns restraint. It learns to listen. It learns to release anger, surrender ego, and seek wisdom before responding to conflict. A person who speaks with God before speaking to others becomes a vessel of peace. What this all reveals is simple, yet profound. The mouth is a mirror of the heart. Proverbs teaches that whatever fills the heart flows from the lips. That means transformation does not begin with speech, it begins with the soul. When the heart is filled with grace, the words will follow. When the heart is governed by fear, criticism, or pride, the words will reveal it. The goal, then, is not to police speech through willpower, but to renew the heart through wisdom. Because when the inner life is aligned with God, the mouth will echo that alignment. Some decisions can be calculated, some plans can be mapped out, and some questions can be answered with a quick search and a few well-placed keystrokes, but not all of them. There comes a moment, sometimes unexpected, when the logic runs dry, the data stops helping, and the next step feels cloaked in fog. In those moments, the soul begins to remember what Proverbs 3 verses 5 and 6 have been saying all along. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to Him, and He will make your paths straight. This is not an escape from thought or a dismissal of reason. It is an invitation to place reason in its rightful place beneath the wisdom of God. This generation has been trained, almost unconsciously, to rely on instant information. It's reflexive now. Type the question, scroll the results, skim the top answers, and move forward. Knowledge is immediate, recommendations are personalized, and the digital world constantly evolves to make us feel more in control. But Proverbs dares to speak into that rhythm and say, be careful. Because not everything that appears certain is secure, and not everything that makes sense is sacred. Your own understanding, no matter how sharp, is still human. It still sees through a narrow lens. It still filters the future through the limits of the present. What makes Proverbs 3 so disruptive is the absolute nature of its language. It doesn't say partially trust or occasionally lean. It says with all your heart and in all your ways. That's not poetic flair. It's a dismantling of self-sufficiency. It calls the reader to release the illusion of control that comes with being informed, connected, and efficient. Because no amount of preparation can replace divine guidance. You can plot a course, anticipate outcomes, even forecast risk, and still miss the direction God has chosen if you're leaning too hard on your own insight. His wisdom often moves outside the lines of logic, and not because it ignores truth, but because it sees more of it than we do. This kind of trust, this total surrender, is uncomfortable in a culture that celebrates autonomy and mastery. You're taught to figure it out, to optimize every part of your life, to know your next 5 steps and prepare for 10 outcomes. But faith isn't a 5-step plan, and divine guidance isn't about maximum control. It's about being led by a hand that sees beyond the bend in the road, even when you don't. Proverbs doesn't just challenge the overconfidence of logic, it reveals the kindness of submission. It says that when you trust Him, when you truly lay your ways before Him, He will direct your path, not might. Not possibly, will. That kind of certainty can't be found in data. The algorithm, for all its complexity and brilliance, works off what it knows. It calculates based on what you've seen, what you've searched, what others like you have done. But it does not know your calling. It does not understand your soul. It cannot perceive the anointing on your life or the timing of heaven. Proverbs reminds us that God does not operate on predictability. His path is straight, but it often begins where human paths end. What seems like a delay may be protection. What looks like a detour may be design. What feels like silence may be preparation. These are not errors in the plan. They are ingredients of a journey that only wisdom can navigate. And this is where surrender becomes not just an act of faith, but a strategy for peace. Because the more you try to hold the reins of every outcome, the more anxious you become. You check every variable, run every scenario, weigh every possibility, and still feel unsettled. That's because the soul was never designed to carry what only God can. Trust in Him isn't weakness, it's alignment. It's saying, I don't see it all, but I know you do. I don't understand, but I don't need to in order to keep walking. The phrase, lean not on your own understanding, isn't a call to ignorance. It's a call to perspective. Human understanding, when not submitted to God, becomes short-sighted. It looks at comfort as success. It judges timing based on urgency. It interprets resistance as failure. But divine wisdom redefines all of that. It says sometimes the closed door is a gift. Sometimes the delay is mercy. Sometimes the disappointment is the beginning of something better. But only the surrendered heart will recognize it. And here's the hidden beauty of this chapter. Submission does not erase individuality. It doesn't silence your desires or force you into a life of passive waiting. Submitting your ways to God actually clarifies your purpose. It removes distractions, untangles confusion, and sharpens your vision. Because when the path is no longer dependent on your own calculations, you're free to walk boldly without fear of missteps. You're not second-guessing every move, because your confidence doesn't come from your plan. It comes from His presence. This matters deeply for a generation that is constantly told to brand itself, define itself, and chart its own success. You're encouraged to trust your gut, follow your truth, and chase your dream. But Proverbs says not all dreams are safe, not every gut feeling is accurate, and not all truth leads to freedom. What matters is not that you believe in something, it's what you believe in. And if your understanding is the highest authority in your life, then your peace will only be as steady as your perspective. God's direction doesn't always feel efficient, but it is always intentional. He may lead you away from visibility to develop your character. He may slow down your progress to prepare you for pressure. He may remove options to make space for obedience. And all of this feels disorienting if you're used to clarity based on analytics. But Proverbs 3 verse 6 assures us, "In all your ways submit to Him, and He will make your paths straight." That straight path isn't always quick, but it is always sure. The peace of God is not found in perfect plans, but in perfect trust. When your faith is rooted in who He is, not just in what you want, your heart becomes steady even when the road is uneven. This is not the kind of faith that closes its eyes and hopes for the best. This is a faith that sees further than the eye, deeper than the mind, and more clearly than the best advice online. It is a faith that walks through uncertainty with confidence, not because the destination is obvious, but because the guide is trustworthy. Not all strength roars, not all greatness is announced, and not every powerful person is standing on a platform, demanding to be noticed. In fact, according to the Book of Proverbs, the truest strength is often quiet, unassuming, and unseen by the world until its fruit becomes undeniable. In a culture that insists success must be visible, curated, and loudly affirmed, Proverbs offers a strikingly different path. Proverbs 11 verse 2 declares, "When pride comes, then comes disgrace, but with humility comes wisdom." It reverses the equation so many have built their lives upon. Here, greatness is not found in self-promotion, it is discovered through surrender. Influence does not flow from ambition alone, it is drawn out through humility. This is not easy to accept when the world around you celebrates branding more than character. From an early age, people are taught how to shape perception. You are told to market yourself, to stand out, to show what you can do, and why you deserve to be seen. Even spiritual gifts can be turned into platforms. Even moments of genuine vulnerability can be reframed for public sympathy or clout. The temptation is not always to lie, but to perform, to exaggerate the light and hide the shadows. But Proverbs pulls no punches. It names pride for what it is, a pathway to disgrace. Not because pride always leads to public failure, but because it always leads the heart away from wisdom. Pride blinds more than it boasts. It quietly inflates the soul, convincing a person that their way is best, that their instincts are always right, that advice is optional, and that correction is a threat. Proverbs 16 verse 18 delivers the warning plainly. Pride goes before destruction, a haughty spirit before a fall. What makes pride so dangerous is that it often grows unnoticed. It can dress itself in excellence. It can wear the language of calling, even disguise itself as confidence. But eventually, pride isolates. It resists counsel. It hardens under pressure. It builds high walls of ego that wisdom cannot climb. In contrast, humility opens the door. It creates space, not only for others to speak, but for God to move. A humble heart is not consumed with managing appearances. It is more interested in becoming than appearing. It is willing to be led, to be refined, to admit when it is wrong. And this, according to Proverbs, is where wisdom begins to flourish. Proverbs 15 verse 33 says, "Humility comes before honor." Not talent, not charisma, not public recognition, humility. That inner posture that refuses to build a life on applause. The world rarely tells you that. It tells you to seize every opportunity, to build your personal brand, to position yourself as a voice worth following. You are told to hustle, to rise, to protect your platform. But the wisdom of God calls for a different pursuit, not self-exaltation, but inner transformation. Proverbs 22 verse 4 captures it beautifully. Humility is the fear of the Lord. Its wages are riches and honor and life. That verse doesn't condemn success, it redefines it. True reward comes not from rising above others, but from lowering yourself beneath God. And lowering yourself does not mean thinking less of yourself. It means thinking rightly. It means seeing yourself through heaven's eyes, valuable, yes, but not self-made. Gifted, yes, but dependent. Called, yes, but never above correction. Humility does not silence the voice, it sanctifies it. It does not erase influence, it purifies it. Because a person led by humility does not have to prove themselves constantly. Their life, their fruit, their spirit will speak louder than any post ever could. Proverbs speaks this way, not to suppress ambition, but to purify it. Because ambition without humility leads to striving, to jealousy, to competition disguised as collaboration. But ambition refined by humility leads to purpose without panic, movement without self-centeredness, service without manipulation. When humility governs a life, everything changes, even how success is measured. You begin to care more about faithfulness than followers, more about legacy than attention, more about impact than image. This message strikes hard in a generation formed by the pressures of online identity. You are rewarded for being visible, for being remarkable, for being different. But God does not measure influence by reach. He measures it by surrender. Proverbs 29 verse 23 puts it this way, "Pride brings a person low, but the lowly in spirit gain honor." That means honor does not come to those who chase it. It comes to those who chase God. And God often calls people into seasons of hiddenness, not to punish them, but to protect them, to develop them, to root them before they rise. There is strength in being teachable. There is dignity in being corrected. There is beauty in not needing the spotlight. And there is spiritual authority that flows from a life that has been humbled by God rather than elevated by man. Proverbs teaches that humility is not a personality trait, it is a lifestyle. It affects how you speak, how you listen, how you lead, how you learn. It refuses to use others for advantage. It recognizes that every breath, every opportunity, every gift is just that, a gift. And in that posture of humility, wisdom finds a home. Not a heart filled with self, but a heart emptied and ready to receive what the world cannot offer. Ready to walk in power without pride. Ready to reflect the glory of God without stealing it. Because at the end of the day, real power is not found in how many know your name, but in how deeply you know His. The people we walk with leave footprints on our souls, whether we recognize them or not. Some leave us more grounded, more alive, more attuned to what matters. Others leave us more distracted, more reactive, more distant from who we were meant to become. Proverbs speaks into this reality with piercing clarity. It doesn't romanticize relationships or reduce them to emotional comfort. It treats them as formative forces, as either tools of refinement or agents of erosion. Proverbs 13 verse 20 puts it plainly, "Walk with the wise and become wise, for a companion of fools suffers harm." This is not about being selective for the sake of superiority. It is about spiritual survival. In a time when connection is effortless but depth is uncommon, the call to choose wisely has never been more necessary. With a few taps on a screen, you can enter someone's life, scroll through their moments, hear their opinions, and align your heart with their voice. But Proverbs reminds us that ease of access does not mean equal influence. Just because someone is present in your life does not mean they belong in your inner circle. The people closest to you are not neutral. They either call you up or pull you down. They either protect your calling or dilute it. And the danger lies not in overt conflict, but in subtle redirection. When your convictions are softened, your hunger for God numbed, your values compromised not by direct challenge, but by constant exposure to something lesser. This is why the wisdom of Proverbs urges alignment with the wise, not the popular, not the charismatic. The wise, those who fear the Lord, those who carry discernment, those who sharpen more than they soothe, who confront when necessary, who celebrate truth more than comfort. Proverbs 27 verse 17 paints the image with power. As iron sharpens iron, so one person sharpens another. It is a reminder that real friendship is not passive. It involves friction, tension, movement. Sharpening does not happen in silence. It happens in honesty, in accountability, in love that refuses to let someone drift unnoticed. That kind of friendship is rare, but it is essential. Because without it, spiritual growth becomes isolated, and isolation eventually leads to distortion. When you walk alone too long, even your strengths become vulnerabilities. You lose perspective. You start interpreting your emotions as truth. You start tolerating things you once resisted. And before long, you wake up wondering how you drifted so far. Proverbs warns against this not with fear, but with urgency. The relationships you form are not just about shared interests. They are about shared direction. Are you walking with people who love the things of God? Or are you constantly adjusting your pace to match theirs? And it's not just about avoiding obvious harm. The companion of fools suffers not only because of direct damage, but because of proximity to chaos. Foolishness has a way of spilling over. It infects decisions. It creates emotional instability. It welcomes conflict. And it breeds short-term thinking. You may not engage in it directly, but when you remain close to it, you absorb its atmosphere. You begin to compromise just to keep the peace. You begin to lower your standards just to maintain the connection. But Proverbs reminds you that not every connection is worth preserving if it costs your purpose. At the same time, the call to walk with the wise is also a call to be someone worth walking with. Relationships are mutual. You do not just receive influence, you carry it. The question is not only who is shaping you, but what are you shaping in others? Are you someone whose words sharpen or numb? Are your conversations filled with grace and truth? Or are they littered with complaints, distractions, and shallow affirmations? Proverbs invites us to form communities that don't just feel good, but do good. Spaces where holiness is normal, where repentance is welcomed, where encouragement is real and correction is safe. This kind of community doesn't usually happen by accident. It requires intention. It requires discernment. It requires saying no to some connections, not out of pride, but out of protection. And yes, that can feel lonely at first. It can feel like a step backward. But the temporary discomfort of letting go is nothing compared to the long-term damage of staying tethered to the wrong people. Proverbs does not call for isolation, but for alignment. For being surrounded by those who call out your identity in Christ, not just your preferences in culture. Friendship shaped by wisdom is not about being surrounded by perfect people. It's about being surrounded by people who are pursuing the same light. People who know how to weep with you in weakness and call you higher in compromise. People who don't let your gift excuse your character. People who know that laughter matters, but holiness matters more. These are the relationships that endure, not because they're easy, but because they're anchored. In the end, the Book of Proverbs doesn't just instruct us to choose better company, it teaches us how to become that company. To be the kind of friend whose presence leads others into greater courage, greater clarity, greater love for God. To live in such a way that your words carry weight, not because they're loud, but because they're grounded. To create a rhythm of community where growth is normal and stagnation is lovingly confronted. Some battles are not loud. They unfold in silence behind screens, in private thoughts, in secret longings that few ever see. And yet their impact can echo through a lifetime. Proverbs does not shy away from these deeply personal struggles. In fact, it leans in with clarity and urgency, especially in chapters 5 and 7, where the voice of wisdom confronts the lure of sexual temptation, not as an abstract danger, but as a real force that has the power to unravel a life if left unchecked. These chapters are not cold warnings, they are compassionate wake-up calls. They speak not to shame, but to awaken the heart to something better, deeper, and far more freeing than what the world calls normal. The cultural narrative surrounding sex has shifted dramatically, turning intimacy into content, desire into entertainment, and commitment into an option rather than a covenant. In this context, purity is often mocked as outdated, unrealistic, or even repressive. But Proverbs offers a different lens. It does not present purity as a chain around the soul. It presents it as a path, one that leads to clarity, to wholeness, to joy untainted by regret. In chapter 5, the voice of a father pleads with his son, not just to avoid danger, but to choose delight within God's boundaries. Drink water from your own cistern, it says in verse 15, a poetic image calling the listener back to faithfulness, to satisfaction that is not stolen but sanctified. This is not about moral superiority, it is about spiritual preservation. Proverbs warns of the seductive voice of the adulterous woman, but the deeper issue is not about gender or specific people. It is about the spirit of deception that wraps sin in beauty, presents danger as harmless, and makes compromise seem desirable. Chapter 7 paints this picture vividly, showing how temptation does not announce itself as destruction. It speaks sweetly, it flatters, it offers excitement. It appeals to loneliness. It says what the heart wants to hear and never mentions the cost until it's too late. With persuasive words, she led him astray. She seduced him with her smooth talk, says verse 21. And in the verses that follow, the image turns tragic. Like an ox going to the slaughter, the man follows, unaware of the soul-level damage awaiting him. These passages are not fear tactics. They are reflections of a deeper reality, one where the enemy of the soul doesn't come with obvious threats, but with twisted versions of good things. Sexuality was never the problem. It was God's idea, His creation, meant to reflect covenant, intimacy, and joy. What Proverbs confronts is not sex, but distortion. The taking of something sacred and making it shallow. The exchange of lifelong love for momentary thrill. The reduction of a spiritual union into an emotional transaction. And in this confrontation, Proverbs offers a powerful truth. Purity is not loss, it is protection. It is not about avoiding pleasure, it is about choosing pleasure that doesn't turn into pain. What is so often missed in this conversation is the spiritual weight of intimacy. Sexual sin is not just physical. Proverbs repeatedly links it to the soul. It speaks of hearts being led astray, of destinies being stolen, of clarity being lost. Sin in this area carries a unique kind of fog. It clouds judgment, breeds shame, and often leads to hiding. And hiding, more than anything else, separates people from intimacy with God. It's not that He withdraws, it's that the soul, burdened by guilt, stops seeking Him. That's the deeper cost Proverbs is trying to prevent. Not just broken relationships, but a broken connection with the one who heals all things. Yet in a culture that confuses lust with love, purity feels counterintuitive. Everywhere you turn, sexuality is marketed, stylized, and normalized. Songs glamorize it, films dramatize it, and social media trivializes it. The pressure is relentless. The standard of holiness feels almost impossible to uphold when the world insists that boundaries are barriers to freedom. But Proverbs insists that the opposite is true. Boundaries are not walls to keep you from life, they are gates that lead to it. Holiness does not suffocate desire, it purifies it. It teaches the soul to hunger for what is real, not just what is immediate. And here lies the freedom. Because those who pursue purity are not just resisting, they are receiving. They are making room for intimacy that does not depend on performance, for love that does not exploit, for relationships that are not built on adrenaline but on trust. Proverbs calls this the path of life, and it is not a metaphor. It is a real journey marked by peace instead of regret, clarity instead of confusion, and joy that lasts longer than the moment. One of the most beautiful aspects of Proverbs 5 is its vision for delight. It does not settle for avoidance. It calls the listener to embrace covenant love. May your fountain be blessed, and may you rejoice in the wife of your youth, says verse 18. This is not dry obedience, it is passionate faithfulness. It is a picture of intimacy that grows deeper with time, unshaken by comparison, untouched by shame. This is the vision the world does not advertise. It is quieter, it takes longer, but it is sacred and its fruit endures. For those who feel like purity is no longer an option, like the past has already written the future, Proverbs does not speak condemnation. It speaks wisdom, and wisdom always makes room for redemption. The same God who calls you to holiness also offers healing. The same text that warns also welcomes. Purity is not just a standard to keep, it is a journey back to the heart of God, no matter how far one has wandered. It is possible not because of human willpower, but because of divine grace. And so, Proverbs doesn't merely say resist, it says return. Return to the voice of wisdom. Return to the kind of love that doesn't leave you empty. Return to the boundaries that were never meant to imprison you, but to free you from the chains of imitation. This is not old-fashioned, this is eternal. And while culture will continue to move the goalposts of morality, Proverbs keeps pointing to something that never shifts, the holiness of God and the invitation to live in His presence, unashamed, undivided, whole. Some lessons are whispered gently, others are carved through trial. And while one feels tender and the other feels fierce, both come from the same source when they are born from divine love. Proverbs 3 verses 11 and 12 reach into this tension with tenderness and clarity. My son, do not despise the Lord's discipline, and do not resent His rebuke, because the Lord disciplines those He loves, as a father the son He delights in. This is not a passage to be glossed over. It is a divine correction to a deep misunderstanding that hardship must mean abandonment, that struggle is evidence of disfavor, and that pain can only ever signal punishment. Proverbs flips that assumption and shows us something far more intimate. Discipline is not rejection. It is a confirmation of belonging. In a world shaped by comfort and convenience, correction is often treated as an offense. The moment something becomes difficult or confrontational, the reflex is to retreat, to assume something has gone wrong, or worse, that someone is against you. But Proverbs invites a different response. It asks us not to pull away from discipline, but to look deeper into it. Because the one who corrects you is not your enemy, he is your father. And not a distant one, not cold, not indifferent. A father who delights in you. The correction does not come from anger. It comes from love so deep that it refuses to let you drift into patterns that would destroy you. This is not an easy truth to embrace, especially in a culture where personal freedom is often confused with spiritual maturity. The modern narrative elevates the self as the final authority, your truth, your way, your journey. But when the self becomes uncorrectable, it also becomes unteachable. And an unteachable heart will never reach its full design. Proverbs understands this and confronts it not with shame, but with invitation. It calls us back to the posture of the son who trusts the father enough to receive his shaping hand, even when it stings. Discipline, in the language of wisdom, is not about control, it is about formation. It's the training of a soul, not the punishment of a mistake. It's not reactive wrath, it's preemptive love. The pain that correction brings is not the pain of rejection, but the pain of realignment. It's the soreness that comes after setting a bone back in place. It hurts, but it heals. It wounds, but only to restore what was dislocated. Proverbs doesn't soften this reality, it makes it sacred. And here's where the mystery deepens. Often the places where God is most present don't feel spiritual. They feel hard. They feel like silence, like delay, like closed doors, like internal tension. Yet these are often the exact environments where the deepest refining is taking place. Not to break you, but to strengthen what was weak, to expose what was hidden, to reshape what was misaligned. And if we're honest, most of us don't volunteer for that kind of process. We want transformation without fire, wisdom without wrestling, depth without disruption. But Proverbs doesn't cater to that desire. It tells the truth. Discipline is the narrow road that leads to maturity. It's also important to recognize that not all pain is proof of discipline. Life in a broken world brings wounds of all kinds. But when the pain carries the weight of conviction, when it pulls you toward repentance, when it exposes the fault lines of pride or compromise or complacency, that is when discipline becomes unmistakable. It is not about guilt, but about grace that refuses to let you stay the same. It is God saying, "I love you too much to let this continue." And that kind of love, though it may be fierce, is always faithful. One of the hidden gifts of discipline is clarity. When God allows discomfort, He is often clarifying what matters most. Stripping away illusions, uncovering idols, separating noise from truth. In the moment, it may feel like something is being taken away. But over time, you begin to see that what was removed was never meant to remain. The temporary pain of pruning makes space for deeper fruit. The momentary sting of conviction leads to long-term peace. This is why Proverbs does not say merely, "Endure the Lord's discipline." It says, "Do not despise it." Because to despise it is to misread it, to mistake it for abandonment, when it is actually evidence of belonging. And for those who have walked through long seasons of difficulty, this truth may feel distant. You've prayed, you've waited, you've done your best to stay faithful, and yet life continues to press against you. The temptation is to believe you've been overlooked, that maybe you failed, that perhaps you are no longer in favor. But Proverbs wants to quiet that lie. It speaks to the heart that feels weary and says, "You are being shaped, not forgotten." The pain you feel is not the absence of God. It is His hand refining something eternal in you. Even the very structure of Proverbs 3 reinforces this. The verses surrounding this reminder of discipline are filled with promises of trust, provision, and divine direction. This means correction is not a break in love, it is a part of it. God does not switch roles from kind to harsh. His discipline flows from the same heart that guides, provides, and protects. And just as a good father does not discipline out of irritation, but out of care, so does God use every hard moment to draw us deeper, not push us away. Discipline also invites a redefinition of success. In God's eyes, success is not measured by ease, but by alignment. It's not about how much you've gained, but how deeply you've grown. And often, the moments of greatest growth are the ones that cost the most comfort. Proverbs does not deny the ache of these moments. It simply insists they are not wasted. Nothing in God's hand ever is. True wisdom does not begin in knowledge or experience, nor is it birthed in the opinions of the educated or the confident. It begins in reverence, a deep, abiding awareness of who God is and who we are in light of Him. Proverbs 1 verse 7 declares, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge," not as a suggestion or poetic phrase, but as a foundational truth. Before insight, before strategy, before any understanding of how to live well or love rightly, there must be this holy reverence. Without it, all other knowledge remains shallow, easily twisted by pride or self-interest, easily lost in confusion or contradiction. In a generation that often exalts intellect while dismissing spiritual awe, this may feel like a contradiction. But it is not ignorance that leads to foolishness, it is arrogance. The refusal to recognize a higher authority, the resistance to being taught, the assumption that human reasoning alone is sufficient. Proverbs does not call for blind obedience, but for awakened humility. To fear the Lord is not to cower in dread, it is to stand in wonder. It is to recognize that God is not a concept we manage, but a presence we honor. It is the anchor of every wise choice, the compass for every unclear path, the filter for every influence and invitation. This fear is not abstract. It shapes how we speak, how we choose, how we walk in a world that insists on its own way. It makes us careful with what we entertain, cautious with who we follow, and deliberate in how we lead. And it gives birth to a kind of clarity the world cannot replicate. A clarity that sees temptation for what it is, that sees pride as poison, that sees purity as power, that sees correction not as shame but as love. Without this fear, life becomes a string of clever choices that never reach the soul. But with it, even the most ordinary day becomes sacred. Proverbs never separates wisdom from worship. To be wise is to walk in the fear of the Lord, to live every moment in the awareness that God is present, holy, and deeply invested in every detail of your life. This fear creates intimacy, not distance. It does not lock the heart in anxiety. It opens it to divine alignment. It is this fear that keeps ambition from turning to idolatry, that keeps influence from becoming manipulation, that keeps knowledge from becoming arrogance. And most of all, it keeps the soul soft, ready to learn, ready to repent, ready to follow wherever He leads. This is the beginning, not the end of a journey, but the starting point of one that leads to life. When Proverbs points us to the fear of the Lord, it is not offering a restriction. It is unlocking the only door that leads to what is eternal. In a world filled with options, opinions, and shifting definitions, this is the unchanging foundation. That wisdom begins where reverence begins, and life unfolds as we surrender our ways to the one who designed them. If this message spoke to your heart, take a moment to support the channel by subscribing. Click the like button, leave a comment sharing what impacted you most, and send this video to someone close to you who needs to hear it. Your engagement helps us continue sharing God's truth with more people every day. If you've ever felt like you're trying to navigate life with too many voices speaking at once, each claiming to know what's best for you, you're not alone. In a world overwhelmed by opinions, trends, and noise, the soul quietly begins to crave something ancient, something stable, something that doesn't change when the algorithm does. That's exactly why the Book of Proverbs is not just relevant, it's essential. This isn't a dusty collection of moral sayings. It's a voice that rises above the chaos, offering direction when everything else is pulling you in 100 directions. If messages like this stir something in you, subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share your thoughts in the comments. We're building a space for real conversations that matter. When Proverbs opens its pages, it doesn't do so with small talk. It begins with intention. It is a book that knows exactly why it exists: to give wisdom, instruction, insight, discernment, and understanding. Proverbs 1 verse 2 lays it out with clarity. It was written for people who are trying to live with meaning, for those who refuse to settle for a surface-level life. These aren't casual reflections. They're spiritual architecture. Truth so foundational, they can hold the weight of your calling, your pain, your decisions, and your future. What sets this book apart is not just what it says, but how urgently it says it. It wastes no time with fluff or pretense. By verse 7, it has already delivered the heart of the matter. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. This isn't fear as an anxiety, it's reverence. It's choosing to live as if God actually exists, actually speaks, and actually knows better than we do. Without that starting point, everything else falls apart. Because until God is in His rightful place, nothing else can truly be in yours. But Proverbs doesn't just speak to our relationship with God. It immediately shifts to who we walk with. Verses 8 through 19 pull the curtain back on influence. It warns that even those closest to you can pull you away from what's right if their hearts aren't rooted in truth. That's not just a lesson in ancient friendship. It's a word for right now. Because in the age of influencers, follows, and friend lists, who you let shape your life matters more than ever. Wisdom doesn't only protect you from your enemies, it teaches you how to guard your circle. Then, as if sensing the urgency of the times, Proverbs introduces wisdom not as an idea, but as a voice. A living, breathing voice that walks into the center of public life and calls out, not with condemnation, but with passion. Verses 20 through 33 give us this image. Wisdom crying aloud in the streets, pleading to be heard, longing to protect, to guide, to bless. Yet many choose noise over truth, comfort over correction. And Proverbs is painfully honest about what happens when that voice is ignored. Still, it ends with hope. Verse 33 offers a promise that rings through every age. Whoever listens to me will live in safety and be at ease, without fear of harm. That is the reward of wisdom, not a life without storms, but a soul that stands secure when they come. This is not ancient literature. This is a roadmap for a generation desperate for clarity. In a world where everyone has something to say, where feeds refresh by the second and opinions multiply faster than anyone can count, it becomes harder and harder to recognize what wisdom actually sounds like. It is not that wisdom has gone silent. It is that the volume of everything else has gone up. Proverbs says in chapter 1, verse 20, that wisdom cries aloud in the street and raises her voice in the public square. It is not hidden in temples or locked in libraries. It is not whispered in secret codes for the spiritually elite. It is out in the open, calling to anyone willing to pause and truly hear. Yet the challenge today is not just about hearing a voice. It is about knowing which voice to trust when so many are speaking at once. We live in an age where information is abundant, but understanding is rare. Where you can access 1,000 perspectives in a matter of minutes, but come away more confused than before. Everyone presents their version of truth with confidence, often with emotion, sometimes with anger, and nearly always with urgency. But Proverbs makes a distinction that is vital. Wisdom is not just about knowing things. It is not the same as being well-read, quick-witted, or informed. It is not about winning arguments or having the last word. Wisdom is a spirit, a posture, a divine gift that discerns not only facts but the heart behind them. It looks deeper than the headline, further than the trend, and beyond the noise. In verse 21, wisdom takes her stand at the city gate, the place where decisions are made, where conversations are held, where justice is administered. She does not choose isolation. She steps directly into the chaos. She places herself where people pass by, where commerce and culture collide. This image is powerful because it shows that wisdom does not retreat from complexity. It enters it, it engages. It speaks even when few are listening, and it does not lower its standard just to be accepted. But what happens when wisdom calls and is ignored? That is the painful part of this chapter. Wisdom describes a generation that scoffs, that refuses correction, that laughs at counsel. Verse 24 says, "Because you refused to listen when I called, and no one paid attention when I stretched out my hand." This is not a statement of anger. It is a revelation of heartbreak. Divine wisdom is not content with silence. It reaches out. It offers itself. But when ignored, it cannot force itself on anyone. And the tragedy is not just that people walk away. It is that they often run toward destruction, thinking it is freedom. Today, the digital world presents knowledge as power and speed as success. If you can react fast enough, post smart enough, and say something sharp enough, you can win attention. But attention is not the same as wisdom, and noise is not the same as voice. The Book of Proverbs disrupts this false equivalence. It reveals that many loud voices are empty, that the most shared content is often the least grounded in truth, and that wisdom is not always found in trending threads, but in sacred stillness. It calls us to step back from the scroll, to question what we consume, and to recognize that not every thought that feels right is rooted in truth. The problem is not just misinformation, it is disorientation. People are drowning not because they lack content, but because they lack anchors. They do not know what to hold on to. And Proverbs answers with clarity. It offers a kind of wisdom that is not reactive but rooted. A wisdom that sees beyond emotion, that calls out not with flattery but with conviction. It confronts the soul and not just the intellect. It dares to say that not all voices deserve your time, not all messages deserve your heart, and not all knowledge leads to life. One of the most subtle dangers of this age is that the line between wisdom and data has blurred. We are taught to trust what is calculated, what is measurable, what is statistically supported. And while insight can come from research, Proverbs points to something deeper. It speaks of wisdom that is spiritual, that is formed in the fear of the Lord, that cannot be reduced to algorithms or graphs. It is wisdom that speaks intention, that calls for patience in an impatient world, that values humility over certainty. Think about how often people feel exhausted, not just physically but mentally and spiritually. This exhaustion is not caused by a lack of access to knowledge, but by an overload of opinions. When every screen becomes a battleground for ideologies, when every conversation carries the potential to divide, when every moment online pulls you into 1,000 directions, where do you go to recover your soul? Proverbs answers that. It says go to wisdom. Not to arguments, not to endless scrolling, not to reactionary posts, but to wisdom. Because wisdom does not compete with chaos. It stands apart from it. It is not a louder noise. It is a clearer voice. And that voice still speaks today. It has not lost relevance because it never depended on trends. Proverbs stands as a witness through the generations because it does not change its shape to fit culture. It offers something that nothing else can, perspective rooted in eternity. In verse 29, wisdom mourns the choice of those who hated knowledge and did not choose to fear the Lord. That phrase, did not choose, is key. Because wisdom is not something that happens to you. It is something you seek, you receive, you honor. It does not shout over you. It waits for your attention. This means the problem is not that wisdom is hidden. It is that distraction is preferred. Many would rather be entertained than confronted, rather be affirmed than shaped. But Proverbs does not offer comfort at the expense of truth. It offers comfort through truth. And truth, by its very nature, demands attention. Not passive scrolling, not casual glances, but deliberate, humble, focused attention. In the middle of this digital storm, Proverbs reminds us that silence is not emptiness, that solitude is not isolation, and that slowing down is not weakness. These are the places where wisdom speaks loudest. These are the places where divine perspective breaks through the noise, because in every generation, wisdom has cried out. But the question is always the same: who is listening?